Hallo.
Hey, Marcia.
Hey, Fredrika.
All right.
Glada vara med Anna.
Hey.
Anna's there. Everybody's here.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Okay.
Right. So I've been thinking, Marcia. I've been thinking, over the past several months, we've been talking to each other over, from one continent to another. You have been in Brazil for a long time.
It just stopped. I cannot listen. I have a problem, I think, in the internet. Fredrika. I cannot hear Anna.
It's frozen.
It's frozen. Fredrika is frozen. Do you hear me?
It's the internet connection. She's gone.
She's gone.
It might be the hurricane.
Hey, Fredrika.
Hey.
Marcia. Hey, I don't know. We got disconnected. All right.
Now we're
But
here.
I think
You were gone.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody's here. That's nice. Yeah, no, so I was thinking, Marcia and Anna, for many, many months now, Marcia and I, we've been talking, to one another as friends and colleagues and sisters, from one continent to another. You've been in Brazil, so has Anna for many months. I've been, and I still am, in the US, and now both of you are actually in Sweden. I'm still here. And we've been, I guess, as so many other people, trying to bridge this huge distance, both in time and space, as have many others done. And we've been talking about what, or rather where we are, right? And how we are, And I wanted to ask you, maybe to start off our discussion about, where is it that you are now?
Yes, maybe I have to say that my feeling is that I am nowhere. And I heard from you that really we could say now and here, but if we read these two words together, we will have nowhere. And that's really interesting because we cannot see that when we listen, but when we read, we can see. So there is a disconnection between the writing and the said. But I would say that this nowhere is very disturbing because in a certain sense, with all these devices, we have these screens, we have three frames in the frame. We see three in the bidimensional. We cannot see the body sculptural. We cannot touch and we cannot breathe. So we cannot contaminate because breathing is contaminating. And but breath is life. So but we could say that everywhere in the world is only in the present, because in front of a device we are always here. But in these months closed in an apartment in Rio, almost 6 months, I got for me clarity, and I want to ask you if you agree with me or what you think about that. This over present time that the devices, the technological, the Zoom, all these platforms obliges us to be, it cuts our connection to the present. Not only cut the connection to the past and to the future, but what is most disturbing is that this kind of present cuts the connection to the present as the living temporality we are all in, because we are always in the present, even when we remember or when we desire and we have expectations. So, but we don't see it. I think some people I speak about, they think I am just making, how to say, word plays or whatever, but it's really experiential for me.
No, I agree. And I think that, you know, it's interesting because you talk about this medium through which now we, as so many others, have to communicate. I think what happens is that literally in the picture, of course, it makes us flat, as you point out, you know, unidimensional. But that is precisely what it does with time too.
Yeah.
You know, time has become, the present has become something exceedingly flat, that we have to, of course, I mean, you know, as soon as the screen is gone, we delve into a much more multidimensional, both time and present and body for that matter, you know. But I wonder, you know, it says something. It says something because it says something not only about the flatness, but also the starkness of this present moment that seems to be nothing more than precisely this. We're inside of it. We cannot think outside of it.
Yeah.
And that is something that in a previous conversation, I likened to the way that, you know, strangely, at least here where I am in the south of the US, where we have been stricken by 9 hurricanes, 9 devastating hurricanes in just a couple of months. There was one last night. We can see them coming, you know. We can take precautions, of course, we do that all the time. We always have the kit ready, you know, with water and batteries and candles and what have you. All of that we can deal with. There is only one thing we cannot deal with, and that is once it's here. Because once it is here, it is a present that overshadows exactly everything else. And I think that this is also exactly the kind of temporality we are in since COVID-19. And that's only one aspect of it. Another one, of course, from our different perspectives, are the political moment, the political present that we are in presence of. Something that is no longer multidimensional, it is all-encompassing, it's already there. And being in that place, I think, is very paradoxically both being nowhere and now here, but there's nothing outside of it. That's what I'm feeling.
I think it's very important what you say, because if I understood correctly, we are both somehow denying that what the most part of the people are willing to state is that we are now everywhere, and I think we are not everywhere, I would say. So I think we are agreeing with that. But also what I think is interesting, what you said, is that it is the hurricane, not only the 9 hurricanes that you have been experiencing in New Orleans and the south part.
Mm.
But we are this present that is overwhelming to a point that it cuts the bind with the present, the lived present. It is that we are somehow living in the eye of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And in the eye of the hurricane, how can we see? So our eyes are bleeding somehow, because it's really all the time I feel the eyes. No? And but to see something happening while it is happening is very difficult, because we don't have this the philosophical virtue of self-distance or getting the critical distance or getting this, because we are being seen, no? Being seen by the phenomena rather than seeing the phenomena. And I think that's why what we were saying. And it's not a metaphor what we are living in these both countries, or but all over the world, but we could say America and Brazil, that we are living the politics of this hurricane very concretely. And we cannot, how to say, neither have, we have not a lot of knowledge about fascism, about the history, about a lot of things, anti-fascist movements, a lot of things. But being in the eye of the hurricane, how to think, how to say, and maybe what is the role of our Zoom conversations in relation to what can be done, or so that is also a question.
Yeah. I don't know, you know, a more in a very, you know, everyday way, or you know, way of putting this. We are indeed in the eye of the hurricane, and it is, as it feels like, at least, as if time has stopped. So the question is, okay, you know, from different perspectives, we can say, from the one where I'm sitting right now, you know, we have a major election in just a few weeks. So does that mean that, you know, will time start again after the election? I don't know. I think this particular kind of hurricane is going to be a very long one, so to speak. And I actually do not mean that metaphorically. I mean that it is something, as in something that is so devastating that we actually don't have the ground to stand on anymore. Yeah. The landscape has already changed, and we're just clinging to whatever we still have, you know, the house that we still have, the ground that we still have, the trees that are still in that ground, in the same way that, you know, being every single day and night and morning assailed by news of various catastrophes, we still cling on to what we have, which is making coffee, or in my case, walking the dogs, or, you know, the things that we do, or just plain work, you know, or checking in with one another, because that is what we still have. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, I don't know what we're doing.
Yes, I think, you know, I think I agree with you that this mutation, we have a kind, I think we are in the moment of that a mutation has happened already, as you said.
Yeah.
And there is a beautiful description of the god Pan, the Greek god Pan, that you remember, Fredrika, we had a course together about Spinoza and Schelling and the philosophy of nature. It was so beautiful. I always remember that. And Schelling says that Pan is the Greek god, which we know Pan playing the flute playing, but he is the god of the silent, the second of silent after the mutation has occurred. And this second is a second of silence in nature where everybody is like this. How to say in I don't know in English, but in Swedish we'd say ställt, is frozen. Somehow, I don't know. Still, because everything has changed and the whole nature is like this, astonished, and somehow everything has, how to say, has not rested, but stannade upp, has stopped.
Yeah, has stopped, has stilled. You're
Yes,
talking
yes.
about the moment where we're stunned.
Yeah.
Yeah, being stunned. Yes, of course. So it's interesting then what you're saying, because we're simultaneously talking of being in the middle of that nowhere, right? Call it the eye of the hurricane or the middle of nowhere, or time has stopped because we, for an extended time, do not know what to do, what to say, because we don't have our ground anymore. And at the same time, you're saying, since it's already happened, we are in that instant, which is, of course, much more eternal, as it were, and then the instant where it has already happened. So then the question is, okay, so where does that put us?
Mm-hmm.
Because one thing we also know, both from Schelling and Spinoza, is that, actually, at least nature doesn't stop, and neither does time. So it is about our ability to be in that which for us feels groundless, stunned, or stopped.
Yeah.
But actually, it's moving along, It's just we're not following.
Yeah.
And if I may just,
Yeah, please.
No, just with regard to this medium that we're using, because here we are in, on both sides of the Atlantic, and once in a while our screens freeze.
Yes.
That's exactly how this feels.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I was thinking about that too. And but one thing that is for me very, I must say, terrifying is that this long process where capitalism operated change in different levels of existence, relation with the humans and nature, even in nature with nature, even in cosmological or cosmic scales. Uh, but even capitalism has mutated itself.
Mhm.
And I think that what we experience now, we call capitalism, we could call philosophically nihilism, but we could call really a mutation of meaning, in which meaningless became the only meaning.
Mm.
So I would say, and what is terrifying is in this huge mutation where everything, everyone, everything is transmuted or mutated into not a thing, but in whatsoever, redundant, exchangeable, having no value, no meaning, no place, no time. It can be exchanged. It's really how this medium is the concrete image of that. At the same time, we are still, how do you say, we're still looking at each other. So, as you say, nature and time are still there somehow, but we don't know how to handle. And what is really astonishing and terrifying is how the consciousness about the dangers, about the horrors of misery, of exploitation, of lack of respect, of abuse, all is very big, the consciousness, in relation to other epochs of history. But it seems that this big consciousness is not capable to operate some change, which maybe would have to do with not doing, how to say, no? So not let it be, but let it be to do. No, don't do. So big enterprise or whatsoever say, no, not, I don't need so much profit. Of course, naivety to say that. It's strange.
But you're saying something, I think, very, very important, because you're asking about how to think action, you know? Of what nature would action be in a situation where we are nowhere, but still always somewhere, of course, where we are in the middle of a crisis that we cannot act upon and still are being acted upon at all times. So, you know, it is clear that one aspect of the nihilistic mindset that you're talking about would precisely be to say, we stop, we don't do. That's, you know, our action will be to not act, because that in itself, like for instance in a strike, is a very powerful type of action.
Yeah.
However, we also know that if we don't act, others will act plenty in our stead, and not necessarily in a way that we want them to act, you know?
Yes.
So, you know, it's a tricky situation here, even to define of, you know, what type of action is something that we, so to speak, can stand behind on the one hand, while at the same time recognizing, because this is precisely what climate change is about, for instance, recognizing that we are being acted upon in a way that we cannot do anything about. It's tricky, right? There's a lot, you know, of non-doing that would make things probably a lot better on many levels, right? Like don't buy, for instance, don't consume, you know, don't fly, stop making these insane profits, right? And yet at the same time, there are things we have to do, but what are they, you know?
And at the same time, because we are also talking about somehow the possibility and the power of the subject to act or to constitute itself as an acting subject, maybe also, no? And I was thinking that there are things happening nonetheless. And sometimes when I'm watching some video tubes of some groups in the peripheries or suburbs of São Paulo or whatsoever, very poor, miserable, drugs, hunger, black people, persecution, everything. there is much more consciousness, and there are a lot of things happening in terms of becoming really conscious about some big stuffs of problems, and with their own resources, not with the paradigm that how to say the educated class could give. So the big old Marxists, Rancière, oh, I wanted to illuminate the people, and then I go there and I discover, oh, the people can think and have aesthetics.
Right. Oh, wow.
No, but it's a little bit the same that I think somehow is happening also in Brazil, that discover that people means the people that used to be thought as non-being able to think, their own condition of oppression now has other instruments to think, to music, to rap, to action, to violent actions, but in order to preserve life against an even more stronger violence. No? So I think there is question of how you asked in the beginning, where are we? So where and when to act is necessary, non-act is necessary, but also to understand that there are also moments in which the action is already acting by itself. And then maybe we should learn this.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking right now, of course, of the tremendous amount of action that started out as resistance, which is, counteraction, as it were, and that now is affirmative action, in terms of, for instance, Black Lives Matter, of course, that is going on right now. We've seen it before, of course, with the civil rights movement, and it's actually just, it's a continuation of the civil rights movement, of course. It is, of course, at the same time, a continuation of women's right to vote, movements. I mean, there are so many, workers' rights, Everything that we consider has constituted, historically speaking, a change to something more just, or at least less violent or bad than it used to be. Those things, of course, are the results of tremendous actions, right?
Yeah.
So far be it for me to say, there's nothing we can do. No, of course, on the contrary, this is where action has to be. Now, the problem, of course, to return to capitalism is, as for instance, of course, Gilles Deleuze, who talks about capitalism together with other, Félix Guattari and others, he has described in a very good way, I think, how capitalism, and in a way history, scaringly also history in itself, has a way of swallowing up and incorporating, annexating every single counter movement. And I think that, at least from my perspective in this nowhere, now here, this is what stuns me the most. It feels like being in the eye of that storm.
Yeah.
That's fairly depressing.
Yeah.
I'm afraid.
This is I don't know, the influence of Gramsci Gramsci upon Gilles Deleuze or Guattari, but it's very clear that Gramsci was very clear about that already in the 20s, and seeing that capitalism would somehow win because of this flexibility or malleability. And I'm looking at Anna with this, malleability and all this forming. That don't say that it is capitalism, but it was striking me is that has the capacity to incorporate the resistance, anti-resistance, but we are now testimony a very strange combination of this mutated capitalism. I mean, a capitalism that is already no longer in the totally hands of the capitalist personally, but in the corporations, the algorithms, robotization that is. But the combination of that and the need for fascist politics, but fascist politics that are not at all in the old sense of the belief on this, the culture or the cult or the religion of the state, but it's using the state to underminate the state totally. So it is the last dimension is not only to reduce the role of the state in the economy, but how to dissolve the state within the state by means of the state. So this is a very fascist strategy to say, it's you, the Jew, that is destroying the Jew, exterminating the Jew. It's you, the state, that is exterminating the state. No? This is the logic.
Yeah.
And this is very terrifying, because it is as if we see that the sphere of decisions is above, is a
Beyond.
over, beyond, self-managing itself. No? And I think this is.
I mean, it goes for the state, but it goes for I think at least also for the very notion of democracy, where people who are purportedly, at least, democratically elected are the ones who work in order to tear down the very foundations of democracy. It is a very autophagic moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I was wondering, I'm looking at Anna with some elements forming new forms. How, and I was thinking that, what do you think, should we speak in terms of the search for new forms of life? Because I think there is a kind of, not only our fundamental concepts and practices of democracy, freedom, action and thinking, theory, they are changed in the sense that they are demanding not only a change in the content, but a fundamental change. And what does it mean? No? And I wonder that life has also changed in itself. So it's showing new forms of life. There are many forms of life that appears, and maybe we should pay more attention to what does it mean to search for new forms of life, or how to search for new forms of life. I don't know.
I don't know either. There is it is difficult not to associate to what some call the post-human era, in in so many respects, of course. Again, this is already, it's already happened. And here we are, stunned. And of course, it's very ironic that the human condition is now that which has to reflect over its own post condition, as it were. And still, while doing that, of course, we're completely still in a most anthropomorphist reading or interpretation of whatever is happening, you know. Life does take new forms, of course, all the time. The challenge is probably how to find ways of living with that, you know? And I think those are the strategies that we try to think around when we discuss these things, you know, in terms of what can we do and what can we not do? What can we live with as we are being acted upon? And how can we turn our way of being acted upon to something different than this stunned place, you know?
Yeah. I think that sometimes I don't want to sound too, how to say, a kind of post naivety somehow. But I think the attention to how some new forms of life grow and appears in nature, kind of listening to nature, what we call nature, that means plants and all this natural life, just to see how new forms. And I think always in a very beautiful book by Julio Cortázar, the Argentine writer, called The Prose of Observatory. It's a very beautiful books about all, how do you call it?
Eel.
Eel. And not only eels, but it's how we could rethink the connections, not only between us in the Zoom, but the connections in all dimensions of everyday life, the connection with the weather, the climate, but also with the small things. Yeah? And maybe there is something in this situation today that we have to pay attention to very, very simple and almost invisible things, a kind of time of attention. We have less than a minute, Fredrika. You have to finish with a beautiful word.
I don't know that I can. I will say one thing though. I find that right now it is mostly in literature, contemporary literature, not yet published literature, old literature. That's where I find these ways of seeing and thinking.
Me too.
I know.
Me too. It's a way of seeing the singular growing despite.
But also reconnecting with even the notion of a future.
Yes, I think that's what we need more and more. To be silent together can also be beautiful.
Yes. We're good at that. Trying to see Anna.